I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, SoftBank's $100 billion vision fund nears completion after closing a funding round in Saudi Arabia. What Masayoshi Son's childhood dream means for Silicon Valley and the U.S. tech landscape. Plus, Ford kickstarts its focus on ride-sharing and self-driving with a surprise shakeup in the C-suite. What new CEO Jim Hackett brings to the table. And the market's most valuable player is on track to become the world's first $1 trillion company. This, according to one Apple analyst. We'll catch up with him ahead. First, to our lead. SoftBank's Masayoshi Son formally announces the first round of capital commitments for his long-awaited tech investment fund with more than $93 billion in the coffers. Backers include the Saudi Public Investment Fund, as well as Apple, Foxconn, and Sharp. The Vision Fund is expected to top $100 billion in 6 months' time and will focus on startups in the United States. For more now, we're joined by our Bloomberg editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. So, Corey, first of all, this gives effectively Masayoshi Son the biggest fund in all of tech. What does that mean?
Yeah, the biggest fund in all of tech. I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine how such a fund, not quite the $100 billion that they announced it was going to be, but even $93 billion, how that can be effectively used, right? I mean, startups require less and less cash outside of the world of biotech, but require less and less cash in the early days of funding. And so just finding deals, let alone nurturing those deals, is going to be hard to do. Now, interestingly, it's not all cash going into the fund. Their stake in ARM Holdings, a big and long-standing semiconductor fund, is part of the contribution to this fund, but nonetheless, it's just a giant behemoth of a fund that would probably be hard to manage.
Now, there's been a lot of speculation about why it took so long to raise the fund. What do we know about that?
I've been trying to raise $100 billion for a very long time, and it's taken me. They beat me to it. So it's all relative. I think raising the largest venture capital fund in the history of finance is sort of an amazing feat, especially given that the track record of these guys as investors outside of the work at SoftBank. And SoftBank has nurtured many companies, but it's a new structure for a new kind of fund. So I think really that maybe the announcements were a little bit premature, but the goal was astronomical in terms of its ambition just to raise the money. But to put the money to use is a whole different ticket. The other question out there is going to be, what are the fees going to be like for this fund? Are they really going to go 2 and 20 with this fund, or will the fee structure be very different? Because they'll be sitting on a lot of cash for a very long time before they put the money to work.
Now, we've talked a lot about that meeting between President Trump and Masayoshi Son, where Masa said that a lot of this money would be going towards tech innovation in the United States, will create jobs in the United States. How much economic opportunity do you think this can really create here in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's curious where the money is going to be invested, and we don't really have a notion of that. The sums are so large suggests that SoftBank might have entree to certain deals that others would not. And so the real question is, where is the money going to be invested? Is it going to be invested in the U.S. or beyond? With this much money at play, and the notion that it's going to be focused on technology, one might imagine it will be invested globally, not just in the U.S., but certainly some portion of it definitely in the U.S., because it would be hard not to.
All right, Corey Johnson, our editor-at-large, with more context there on the Vision Fund. Thank you so much, Corey. Now, with more reaction to the SoftBank news and a larger perspective on tech investing, we're joined by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, one of the most prominent tech investors in China, the founder and CEO of Sinovation Ventures, also who has held executive positions at Apple, Microsoft, and of course led Google China. Kai-Fu, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Emily.
So what does $100 billion new in potential money going into tech mean for the tech investing landscape? How is this going to shake up the competition?
Well, we are an earlier stage investor in Series A and B, and we usually manage funds in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We began investing in AI and related technologies 4 years ago, and we are actually strong believers also that the future of technology is great. The age of AI is coming, so we're very much looking forward to SoftBank being a later stage investor in some of the companies that we and other venture capitalists have built up.
A lot of this is supposedly going towards AI and AI investments, which we're going to talk about, but I'm curious, could it be too much? I mean, are there enough opportunities out there to warrant $100 billion?
I think there certainly can be deals like that. I think they've already invested in Didi as an example. That's one of the Chinese companies raising on the order of $5 to $10 billion. So if you think about finding another 20 companies like that, the money will be used up before you know it.
Where do you think the most competitive AI investments are right now?
The top technologies are still in the US and Canada. But I think China is coming up strong because of the large market and a large base of AI knowledgeable people. 43% of the top publications are written by Chinese authors. And China's large market will create a lot of data. And AI is driven by brains plus data. So China is coming on strong, currently I would say number 2, but with a good shot of becoming one of the 2 superpowers in AI.
You gave a fascinating commencement address at Columbia where you talked about AI and what it means for jobs. You said, in the next 10 years, all financial companies will be turned upside down with AI replacing traders, bankers, accountants, research analysts, insurance companies. Last year, my AI investment algorithm returned 8 times more than my private banker. That reminds me, when I go home, I'm going to fire my private banker.
I hope he's not watching this.
Yeah, he's been shaking in his boots since you said that. You go on to say that you think simple jobs like factory workers and assistants will also get replaced, but even more complex jobs, doctors, teachers, reporters. Who still has a job in this brave new world?
Well, I think the creators will have a job. The creators in technology, science, but also art, entertainment. So that's a significant portion. And I think people who are in service industries, who deal with social aspects of service, that will actually be a set of jobs we have to create. See, unlike in the Industrial Revolution, where a set of jobs are gone, another set came about through assembly line. This time, we have to deliberately create these jobs that relate to social aspects, because AI is no good at dealing with people to people.
So do you see hordes of unemployed people, or do you think those people will get other new jobs that have yet to be created?
Well, I think first there has to be a way to redistribute the wealth created to ensure some kind of social welfare and minimum stipend for the people who are displaced. And it's going to take time for some amount of retraining. And I think if people are open and inclined to be retrained in the social aspect of the job, say bartender, masseuse, tour guide, and concierge, and jobs like that, that will be on the rise for the people-to-people interaction.
Tech giants from Facebook to Google, IBM to Microsoft have claimed they're working on AI. They're at the front end of the AI revolution. Who really is in the lead?
I think clearly Google is in the lead. With the latest release of TensorFlow, they're bringing the technology closer than ever to an average engineer, to just with maybe 6 months learning to be able to do something with AI. And I think reducing that learning curve is important, and they're in the lead. But it doesn't mean everyone will just automatically use it, because I think the other giants are working hard. And also, I really hope the open source community will come up with a more open solution than the giants, because then we become captivated by their entire ecosystem. And I think that's not good for innovation, nor is it good for the academics to be able to do work on top of open platforms.
So if Google's in the lead, who's behind?
I think Facebook is doing well, Amazon's doing well, Microsoft's doing well. In China, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba are doing well.
What about Apple?
Apple just made their most recent hire to head up AI, and I think they should have every reason to do well, given they have a closed ecosystem that can pump data and learn so much about their users. But they started behind.
Okay. Last question, where do you think you'll be placing your bets?
In the financial industry. Our most successful investment in AI right now is in a company that underwrote 30 million loans this year. It's underwriting 30 million loans in this year. And I think in insurance, banking, investment, we're long-term very optimistic about autonomous vehicles as well as robotics.
And your private banker is out of a job. All right, Kai-Fu Lee, Synovation Ventures, always great to have you here, Kai-Fu.
Thank you.
On the show.
Thank you.
A story we are watching. Lei Echo's founder, Jiao Yueting, is stepping down from day-to-day operations of the online streaming service. Jiao will remain chairman of the company. Lei Echo has grappled with a cash squeeze in the last few months, leading to challenges in fundraising and unpaid bills. Coming up, it is a major CEO shakeup at Ford. What it means for the company's self-driving car ambitions, next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. A surprise shakeup at Ford. Mark Fields is out after less than 3 years as CEO. Shares of the #2 automaker in the U.S. fell 37% during his time in office. The new chief executive, Jim Hackett, who's been leading Ford's initiatives in self-driving cars in ride-sharing, is in. Hackett revived office furniture maker Steelcase during 20 years as CEO there. Ford executive chairman Bill Ford spoke to Bloomberg TV and believes Hackett can do the same thing at the automaker.
And I've never seen such a time in our industry where technology and competitors and everything is converging to drive real change. It's very helpful in a time like that to have a leader who's very experienced in driving transformational change. And fortunately, we have that in Jim Hackett.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Detroit bureau chief, David Welch. So, David, what did Fields do wrong, especially when it comes to self-driving cars, and what do they think Hackett can do better?
Well, the main thing that really hurt Fields was the stock price has been down so much. Their earnings have been down. They've been pulling in their forecasts while General Motors has been raising its forecasts. This is common. Toyota's been doing this too because the auto market is peaking. But you're not seeing many of the big company stocks down quite as much, and the board felt a lot of pressure. Then when you look at the self-driving car side of the business, they really didn't have a clear direction or mission. I think those are questions that the board wanted answered. In the case of GM and others, you've got business units they've acquired. GM has Cruise Automation. They're testing cars in San Francisco. They have a piece of ride-sharing company, Lyft, and they're actually experimenting with putting those in the fleet. So they have some clear things that they want to do with this. They have their own business maven. Ford doesn't really have any of that stuff quite as clearly laid out and in process, and I think they wanted some direction there.
Are we expecting job cuts then at Ford?
Well, they already announced that they were going to cut 10% of the salaried staff globally. I don't know if they're going to be cutting more. Costs have gone up in the past year, actually 2 years at Ford, so you could see more. I think the new CEO is going to get in there. He's going to look at the executive team. He's going to look at costs. So you could expect there'll be more executive changes, and there might be some more cutbacks as well.
One of the big questions is whether Ford can catch up to some of the more forward-looking automakers like Tesla. Sticking with auto news, battery-making gigafactories are about to arrive in Europe. This is a term that was coined by Elon Musk, but now Daimler wants a piece of the pie. Caroline Hyde joins us now with more live from London. Caroline, what exactly do we know about the European gigafactories that are coming?
Well, they're all pushing in the same direction. This is why Daimler, the maker of Mercedes-Benz, of the Maybach in America, this is why they broke ground on a €500 million plant today. Big fanfare. Angela Merkel, the leader of Germany, was there. And it's all about seeing not only the auto sector push towards the battery trend, but so too the utility sector as well. Both of these juggernauts of industry groups really looking to capitalize mainly, Emily, on the falling cost of energy storage. This all becomes basically a bit of a virtuous circle as car makers such as Daimler, such as rival Volkswagen, want to get into the greener energy types of cars. Meanwhile, the likes of the utility makers like Enel in Italy and other makers in Finland and Sweden are looking to basically be able to store renewable energy sources better via batteries such as solar and wind power. All of them are pushing in the same direction. They're going to produce more batteries, thereby pushing down the cost and making the whole economy of the whole thing even better and better, and therefore a more virtuous circle. This is why we're seeing the likes of Daimler get in. This is why BNEF, this is the Bloomberg New Energy Finance researchers, have said, look, battery costs could fall 43% in the next 4 years. This makes electric vehicles perhaps cheaper than normal vehicles as soon as 2023.
David, are we thinking that gigafactories will pop up from more automakers?
Yeah, look, you're seeing forecasts of lithium-ion battery production tripling by 2021. And you're seeing a lot of, there are plans for a lot of cars coming out, particularly from the German automakers. And you look at the one that was just announced today, that's Daimler. If I'm Daimler, I sell commercial trucks and luxury cars. What is Elon Musk making? He's making electric luxury cars, and he's planning on commercial trucks. So he's got a target on Daimler's back, and they want to do something about it. So they're going to put some new vehicles out. BMW, through its Audi division, will be putting out some electric cars. Porsche plans to. Every automaker has to do it for regulation, but a lot of them are seeing that Tesla has some cool cars out there. And toward the end of the decade, we're going to see a lot of electric cars coming to market, and that's where all these batteries are going to go into.
Caroline, will Daimler be able to catch up to Tesla? Is that the question here?
That's the key question. They've got a lot of, as you say, models coming out. And what's notable is, well, they've got to please their own politicians. Merkel of Germany has said, look, by 2030, we want to see 6 million electric vehicles on the road. So they've got to please their own governments at the moment. They've got targets of their own. And it looks as though we could see about 1/5 of all new cars sold by 2030 actually being those electric vehicles. The way you take it on is by making the battery itself more economical. And if we are going to see that cost slashed by some 40%, that's the main cost of the car that you're producing. So suddenly that becomes a lot more cheap, and therefore more people are willing to buy this. And I think it's interesting, therefore, we are going to see VW get in on it, Daimler get in on it, but also we're likely to see Europe, which has a pathetic market share in battery making, just 2.5%. The region wants to double that at least. They want to try and make ends meet and really trying to take on the likes of Tesla in America, but also China and Asia, which actually dominates battery making.
All right, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde live in London. David Welch with us there from Detroit. Thank you both. Another story out of Europe today. The European Union is investigating General Electric for possibly providing misleading information during a merger review. According to people familiar with the case, regulators are looking into whether GE misled EU officials examining a deal to buy LM Wind Power. GE hasn't commented on the news. Last week, the EU fined Facebook $124 million for misleading behavior related to the purchase of WhatsApp. Coming up, how good has President Trump been for media companies? We'll pose that question to New York Times President and CEO Mark Thompson next. And a feature I just want you to check out, our new interactive TV Go function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back and check it out. You can send our producers a message, ask a question. You can play along with the charts we bring to you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. CBS has signed Chairman and CEO Les Moonves to a new multi-year contract through 2021. Moonves will continue receiving his $3.5 million annual salary, plus long-term performance-based incentives. He is one of the nation's highest-paid executives, having earned over $69 million in 2016. Once the contract expires, Moonves has the option to become a senior advisor, as well as form a production company through the network. Staying in media, the New York Times has been making news, both with its own scoops, but also as a target of President Trump. Bloomberg's David Gura caught up with President and CEO Mark Thompson at the J.P. Morgan Tech, Media, and Telecom Conference in Boston, where they discussed the Times' partnership with social media platforms and the changing landscape of the news industry.
We still have a partnership, a multifaceted partnership with Facebook and with Google and with Snapchat and so on. But I think we're all experimenting with them. What's the best way of getting journalism to people? I think the major digital platforms are now asking themselves some quite searching questions about truth and falsehood and about their responsibilities when it comes to journalism. And we're very happy to work with them. At the same time, because we want that deep relationship with our readers, in the end, the best place, we think, for enjoying the New York Times is on our own digital destinations, just as it always has been with our physical newspaper.
Let me ask you lastly here about this, I'll say, lovely rivalry shaping up between you and the Washington Post when it comes to covering politics in particular, and you guys are having fun with each other, breaking scoops back and forth and whatnot. Is what you're doing replicatable at other newspapers? What do you admire about the way that the Washington Post is doing business at this point?
Oh, I think the Washington Post, I mean, that story is the story they have to get right. The New York Times has many things, has national coverage, great coverage of the arts. The New York Times is a much broader provider of news, but on that story, that's the Washington Post's home ground, and we're very happy to take part in the duel every day. And I would say that I think it's a really exciting time to be a journalist. It feels very important to be in journalism right now, and actually part of what's great is seeing outstanding journalists competing with each other, not in a kind of underhand or cynical way, but to get great stories. I think it's what's making this such a wonderful period for journalism.
That was New York Times President and CEO Mark Thompson there with our own David Gura. Coming up, Apple is on its way to achieving a $1 trillion market cap. So says one analyst. We will speak to him next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn may have lied in his application for security clearance. That is according to Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings, who says documents appear to indicate Flynn lied to investigators in 2016. The AP is reporting Flynn will invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Brazil's top court has suspended scheduling a ruling on President Michel Temer, who's accused of endorsing the payment of hush money to a jailed former lawmaker. The allegation represents a potentially significant blow for Temer, whose administration has lurched from one crisis to another since he took office just over 1 year ago. The EU has signed off on a tough Brexit negotiating stance. Negotiators plan to maintain a hard line on the UK's departure bill and won't discuss a future trading arrangement until there's an agreement on other key issues. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price says the U.S. is disappointed Taiwan wasn't invited to the WHO's key annual meeting. It's been invited as an observer to the World Health Assembly the last 8 years. Beijing accuses Taiwan's year-old government of not accepting the One China principle. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. Monday here in Washington, 7:30 Tuesday morning now in Sydney. We are joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen with a look at the markets. Paul, some gains here in the States. Good morning.
Good morning, Elisa, and that could translate into some gains here in Australia too. ASX futures pointing up 0.2% right now. Rio Tinto has announced it intends to buy back $2.5 billion worth of bonds. This is an effort to trim debt and to combat recent downturns in commodity prices. Over in Japan, we're seeing very modest gains on the Nikkei futures at the moment. Sony will hold an investor relations day today. This is in the last year of its midterm plan. Now, in the 5 years since the CEO Kazuo Hirai was appointed, Sony has outperformed the Nikkei. Stock prices almost doubling, headcount coming down by 37,000, and profit returning to the electronics giant. A few other things to watch out for today: earnings from Kingsoft Corporation and Technology One. And on the data front, we will have Japan machine tool orders and CPI numbers out of Singapore. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Let's get back to our lead. Japan's SoftBank announced it's closed the first round of its long-awaited Vision Fund, raising $93 billion. The fund will invest globally in both private and public tech companies. Peter Elstrom, our managing editor for Tech in Asia, joins us from Tokyo with more. And Peter, you've been doing some reporting on this. What is the latest we know about what it took to get these deals closed?
Well, it did take a long time. SoftBank originally announced this deal back in October of last year. It came from a meeting between Masayoshi Son and the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia the month before. And after many months of waiting and anticipating that it was going to